Hello there, I'm glad you're there. Kindly subscribe to this channel. I'd love you to like and share this video. The topic is development of the jaws, the human jaws, that's the mandible and the maxilla. The mandible is the lower jaw and the maxilla is the upper jaw. So how are the human jaws formed? The video intends to highlight the formation of the upper and lower jaws. The mandible and the maxilla form from the tissues of the first brachial arch. The mandible forms from the mandibular process, and the maxilla forms from what we call the maxillary process. So now let's consider the highlights of the formation of the mandible. You need to know that the mandible is a membranous bone. The mandible develops in relation to the nerve of the first branchial arch, and the development of the mandible occurs somehow independent of development of the Meckel's cartilage. The Meckel's cartilage is the cartilage of the first brachial arch. When you look at the primitive vertebrates, the Meckel's cartilage is involved in the formation of the lower jaws in primitive vertebrates. But in humans, the Meckel's cartilage is not believed to be actively involved, though it has a close positional relationship to the developing mandible. At 6 weeks in the development of the embryo, you notice that the Meckel's cartilage extends as a solid hyaline cartilaginous rod, and it is surrounded by fibrocellular capsule. The Meckel's cartilage actually forms the developing ear region, what we call the otic capsule, and then it lies close to the midline where you have the mandibular process is fusing. So what happens is that the Meckel's cartilages, two in number, one on the right, one on the left, do not meet at the midline but are separated by a thin band of mesenchyme. So you have the mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve. The trigeminal nerve is the nerve of the first branchial arch. The trigeminal nerve is the fifth cranial nerve. So the mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve has a close relationship to Meckel's cartilage. So you see the nerve beginning 2/3 of the way along the length of the Meckel's cartilage. So at this point, you see that the mandibular nerve divides into lingual and inferior alveolar branches, and it now runs along the medial and lateral aspects of the Meckel's cartilage. So the lingual nerve runs along the medial aspect of the Meckel's cartilage, while the inferior alveolar nerve runs along the lateral aspect of the Meckel's cartilage. The inferior alveolar nerve further divides into the incisive and mental nerves. So more anteriorly, you have the mental nerve. So the development of the mandible occurs in close relation to this, the course of these nerves, and the position of the Meckel's cartilage. You find out that 7 weeks of development, intramembranous of ossification begins. It begins in a condensation. So in the 7th week of development, you have intramembranous ossification beginning in a particular condensation of fibrous mesenchymal tissue. This fibrous mesenchymal tissue is around the Meckel's cartilage, actually in the mandibular process. So the mandible is forming from the mandibular process. The mandible is forming from the mandibular process at the 7th week of development, and I said this is occurring around the Meckel's cartilage. The Meckel's cartilage has to be well positioned, and around it you have development of the mandible occurring by intramembranous ossification. Intramembranous ossification occurs, and the template is actually fibrous mesenchymal tissue. That's the condensation. So fibrous mesenchymal tissue condenses, and on that condensation you now have intramembranous ossification occurring to form the mandible, and this occurs around the Meckel's cartilage at the 7th week of development. Yes, so I'm still talking about the development of the mandible. So you have intramembranous ossification beginning the condensation, and it forms the first part of the bone of the mandible. You now have a trough of bone, that's a narrow channel of bone that extends to the midline. and here it comes in approximation with a similar one from the other side. So within the mandibular process, you have on the right, you have mandible developing, also on the left. So the two separate centers of ossification remain separated at the mandibular symphysis until shortly after birth. The ramus of the mandible develops by rapid spread of ossification, and this ossification, the ramus of mandible develops by a rapid spread of ossification, and the ossification spreads posteriorly into the mesenchyme of the first branchial arch, and as it does so, it turns away from the Meckel's cartilage. So you have this point of divergence, and at this point you have a landmark there. This point of divergence is marked by the lingula. So the ramus of the mandible is developing now by a rapid spread of ossification posteriorly into the mesenchyme of the first arch, and as it does so, it turns away from the Meckel's cartilage. And I say this point of divergence is marked by the lingula in the adults. So in the adult mandible, you see the lingula. So that lingula is actually the point at which the inferior alveolar nerve enters the body of the mandible. So what do you see by the 10th week of development? At about the 10th week of development, the rudimentary mandible is formed almost entirely by intramembranous ossification, and then the Meckel's cartilage degenerates, and the Meckel's cartilage is widely believed not to be directly implicated in ossification of the mandible. It's not believed to be involved, but now some believe that the Meckel's cartilage plays an active role, as it actually delimits the region where the mandibular bone formation should take place. So it gives the outline for the formation of the mandible. There is also the notion that osteogenic capacity of chondrocytes makes it possible for, in some regions, it's possible for the Meckel's cartilage to contribute to bone formation of the mandible. So due to the osteogenic capacity of chondrocytes that are present there. So that is the belief. So it's widely believed that the Meckel's cartilage is involved in formation of the mandible. So you have further growth of the mandible going on until birth, and the growth of the mandible is influenced strongly by the appearance of 3 secondary cartilages. These 3 secondary cartilages are also called growth cartilages because they are very important in growth of the mandible. And you also have, as further growth of the mandible occurs, you also have development of muscular attachments where muscles will be attached. So these 3 secondary cartilages are called, one, the condylar cartilage, which is the most important. Then you have the coronoid cartilage and the symphyseal cartilage. These cartilages are referred to as secondary cartilages to actually distinguish them from the primary cartilage, which is the Meckel's cartilage. Well, you really need to watch the other video on this channel that has to do with development of the maxilla. So development of the jaws cannot be complete without development of the maxilla. So watch that video on the development of the maxilla. I really appreciate you for being part of my audience. Don't forget to share this video and like. Then you need to subscribe to this channel if you've not done so. Goodbye for now.